The story of Pony Ma, the quiet giant who built China's internet empire. In the spring of 1998, a young software engineer sat in a cramped apartment in Shenzhen, China, watching his bank account dwindle to almost nothing. Pony Ma Huateng was 26 years old, and he had just quit his stable job at China Telecom to start an internet company with 4 friends. They had $50,000 in startup capital, borrowed from family and friends, and an idea for an instant messaging service that nobody thought would work. China's internet had barely 10 million users at the time. Most people had never touched a computer. Venture capitalists laughed at the idea of Chinese people paying for online communication when they could just use a phone. Even Ma's own parents worried he was throwing away a promising career in telecommunications for a foolish dream. But Ma had seen something others missed. During his years at China Telecom, he had watched how Israeli developers used a messaging system called ICQ to communicate instantly across continents. He imagined millions of Chinese people, separated by vast distances in the world's most populous nation, connecting through their computer screens. He called his version OICQ, which stood for Open ICQ, and later renamed it QQ because it sounded friendlier and was easier to remember. What happened next would transform not just Ma's life, but the entire landscape of Chinese technology and society. Within 5 years, QQ would have 100 million users. Within 10 years, Tencent would be one of Asia's most valuable companies. Within 20 years, Ma would become one of the richest people on Earth, and Tencent would touch nearly every aspect of digital life in China through products like WeChat, which would become more essential to Chinese daily life than any single app in the Western world. But this story isn't just about building a successful company. It's about how a shy, introverted engineer who loved astronomy and avoided public speaking created an empire by understanding something fundamental about human nature. While American tech founders often pursued growth through aggressive competition and winner-take-all strategies, Ma built Tencent on a different philosophy, one rooted in Chinese concepts of harmony and incremental improvement. He called it boring management, but it was actually a sophisticated system for adapting to China's unique political and social landscape while outcompeting both domestic rivals and global giants like Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google. This is the story of how Pony Ma became the quiet architect of modern China's digital infrastructure. It reveals the secret sources of his success, not just in the products Tencent built, but in Ma's unusual temperament, his patient capital allocation, his willingness to copy and improve rather than innovate radically, and his careful navigation of China's complex relationship between private enterprise and state power. Understanding Ma's journey means understanding how a generation of Chinese people went from isolated villages to hyper-connected digital citizens, and how one man's vision shaped that transformation more than any other single individual. The world that made Pony Ma. On October 29, 1971, Ma Huateng was born in a small town called Dongfang on Hainan Island, the tropical southern tip of China. The world he entered was in the midst of chaos. China was 5 years into Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, a period of political upheaval that had turned society upside down. Intellectuals were persecuted, schools were closed, and families were torn apart by ideological purges. The economy was centrally planned and desperately poor. There were no private businesses, no stock markets, no concept of entrepreneurship as we understand it today. Ma's father, Ma Chenshu, was a mid-level accountant working for a state-owned port company. This was a modest but secure position in China's planned economy. The family wasn't wealthy by any measure, but they had stability, which was precious during those turbulent years. Ma's mother worked in administration, and together they embodied the typical urban Chinese family of the early 1970s, cautious, hardworking, and focused on weathering political storms without attracting attention. When Ma was 3 years old, his family moved from Hainan to Shenzhen, a sleepy fishing village across the border from Hong Kong in Guangdong province. At the time, Shenzhen had a population of just 30,000 people. It was unremarkable in every way, a backwater town where nothing much happened. But this move would prove fateful, because 7 years later, in 1979, Deng Xiaoping would designate Shenzhen as China's first special economic zone, transforming it from a fishing village into the laboratory for China's economic reforms. Ma grew up watching this transformation firsthand. While most of China remained locked in the rigid structures of the planned economy, Shenzhen became a wild experiment in capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Foreign companies could operate there. Private businesses could form. People could own property and keep profits. Within a decade, Shenzhen went from 30,000 people to over 1 million. Skyscrapers rose where rice paddies had been. The energy was electric, the sense of possibility intoxicating. But young Ma Huateng was not a natural entrepreneur or risk-taker. He was a quiet, bookish child who loved mathematics and science. While other kids played in the streets, Ma spent hours staring at the night sky through a telescope his parents had bought him. He was fascinated by astronomy, by the patterns of stars and planets, by the mathematical elegance of orbital mechanics. He would later say that his love of astronomy taught him to think in systems, to see how small changes in initial conditions could create vastly different outcomes over time. His personality was the opposite of the stereotypical tech founder. He wasn't charismatic or outgoing. He didn't naturally command attention in a room. In school, he rarely raised his hand or volunteered answers, even when he knew them. Teachers described him as diligent but unremarkable, the kind of student who did his work quietly and never caused trouble. He had a few close friends but wasn't popular or socially ambitious. Ma's father, the accountant, instilled in him a deep respect for numbers and careful analysis. Every decision should be based on data, his father taught him. Emotions are dangerous in business. This would become a core part of Ma's management philosophy. Unlike the visionary, instinct-driven leaders common in American tech, Ma would build Tencent on rigorous testing, careful measurement, and incremental improvement based on user data. Ma's mother contributed a different lesson. She emphasized harmony and relationships. In Chinese culture, maintaining good relationships and avoiding direct conflict is essential. His mother taught him that you succeed not by defeating others, but by finding ways for everyone to benefit. This concept, called win-win thinking in the West, is deeply embedded in Chinese business culture, and Ma would apply it masteriously in building partnerships and ecosystems rather than trying to own everything himself. The economic transformation happening around Ma also shaped his worldview profoundly. He watched as Shenzhen went from poverty to prosperity in just a few years. He saw how quickly things could change when the right policies and technologies came together. He learned that being early to a trend mattered more than being the smartest or most talented. Location and timing could trump individual genius. In high school, Ma excelled in math and science but remained socially awkward. He spent his free time learning to code on one of the few computers available in Shenzhen at the time. This was the mid-1980s, when personal computers were rare in China. Most Chinese people had never seen a computer, let alone used one. But Shenzhen's proximity to Hong Kong meant that some advanced technology trickled across the border, and Ma was lucky enough to gain access. He taught himself to program in BASIC and later C, staying up late into the night writing simple programs and games. He wasn't trying to build a business. He was simply fascinated by the logic of code, by the way you could create complex behaviors from simple rules. It reminded him of astronomy, of how simple physical laws could generate the incredible complexity of the cosmos. When it came time for university, Ma scored well enough on the Gaokao, China's brutal national college entrance exam, to attend Shenzhen University, a new institution founded in 1983 as part of the city's development. He majored in computer science, one of the first generations of Chinese students to study this field formally. Shenzhen University wasn't prestigious like Tsinghua or Peking University in Beijing, but it had one advantage: it was in the heart of China's most dynamic economic zone, surrounded by new businesses and opportunities. During his university years from 1989 to 1993, Ma deepened his technical skills and began to understand the commercial applications of software. He and his classmates would later joke that they were training to be programmers for foreign companies, because at that time, China had almost no domestic software industry. The assumption was that talented coders would either join government research institutes or work for foreign firms setting up operations in China. Ma was graduating into a China that was rapidly changing but still finding its way. Deng Xiaoping's famous Southern Tour in 1992 had reinvigorated economic reforms after the Tiananmen Square crackdown of 1989 had temporarily slowed liberalization. The message was clear: China would continue opening up economically, even as it maintained tight political control. This created a unique environment where entrepreneurship was encouraged but within carefully defined boundaries. After graduation in 1993, Ma joined China Telecom, specifically the Shenzhen branch focused on paging systems. This was before mobile phones were common in China. Pagers were the cutting edge of mobile communication, and China Telecom was a massive state-owned enterprise with a monopoly on telecommunications infrastructure. For a young computer science graduate, it was an excellent, stable job with good benefits and social prestige. Ma worked as a software engineer, developing systems for managing paging networks. The job was technically interesting but bureaucratic. State-owned enterprises moved slowly, with decisions made by committee and innovation discouraged. Ma found the environment stifling, but he learned valuable lessons about telecommunications infrastructure and network effects. He saw how communication technologies became more valuable as more people used them, and how controlling infrastructure gave China Telecom enormous power over the market. During his 5 years at China Telecom from 1993 to 1998, Ma watched as China's internet began to emerge. The government allowed commercial internet service providers to operate starting in 1995. By 1997, China had around 600,000 internet users, a tiny fraction of the population but growing rapidly. Ma began spending his evenings exploring this new world, setting up personal web pages, participating in early online forums, and studying how people communicated online. It was during this period that Ma discovered ICQ, the Israeli instant messaging program that had launched in 1996 and quickly gained popularity worldwide. ICQ allowed people to see when their friends were online and send them real-time messages, creating a sense of presence and immediacy that email lacked. Ma was fascinated. He could see how powerful this would be in China, where families were often separated by vast distances, where making long-distance phone calls was expensive, and where the written language made typing actually more efficient than speaking for many types of communication. But there was a problem. ICQ was in English and designed for Western users. It didn't support Chinese characters well. The servers were outside China, making it slow. And most importantly, almost no Chinese people knew about it or had access to it. Ma began to wonder, what if someone built a Chinese version, optimized for Chinese users, with servers in China for faster response times? The idea excited him, but it also terrified him. Ma was not a natural risk taker. He had a stable job, was earning a decent salary, and had recently married his college sweetheart Wang Danteng. Starting a business meant giving up security for a highly uncertain future. In 1997, Chinese internet companies were still figuring out how to make money. There were no success stories yet, no template to follow. What pushed Ma over the edge was a combination of factors. First, he saw the window of opportunity closing. More people were going online every month. If someone was going to build a Chinese messaging platform, it needed to happen soon. Second, he found 4 co-founders who believed in the idea and were willing to take the risk with him. These were Zhong Zhidong, Xu Chenai, Chen Yidan, and Zhang Liqing, all friends and colleagues with complementary skills in technology, design, and business. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Ma calculated that even if the venture failed completely, he could probably get another job. He was young, had good technical skills, and the job market for software engineers was improving as more foreign companies entered China. The downside was painful but not catastrophic. The upside, if it worked, could be extraordinary. In early 1998, the 5 founders each contributed $10,000, raising $50,000 total from personal savings and family loans. They registered a company called Tencent, a name chosen because it sounded professional and international. Ma owned 47.5%, making him the largest shareholder and CEO, though the 5 founders operated more as equals in the early days. They rented a small office in Shenzhen, barely big enough for their desks and a server. Ma quit his job at China Telecom, walking away from stable employment into complete uncertainty. His parents were worried. His wife was supportive but anxious. Ma himself was scared but determined. He had spotted an opportunity at the intersection of China's internet growth, the limitations of existing messaging tools, and his own technical ability to build something better. The company he was about to build would become one of the most powerful and profitable technology platforms in history. But in the spring of 1998, sitting in that cramped office with his 4 co-founders, Ma had no idea if they would survive even 6 months. The secret sources of success. What made Pony Ma different from thousands of other Chinese entrepreneurs trying to build internet businesses in the late 1990s? The answer lies not in any single brilliant insight, but in a combination of less obvious advantages that compounded over time. Understanding these secret sources of Ma's success requires looking beyond the obvious narrative of a smart engineer who built a popular product and examining the specific circumstances, relationships, processes, and character traits that created sustained competitive advantage. The first and perhaps most important source was Ma's deep understanding of Chinese user behavior, combined with his willingness to copy and improve rather than innovate radically. In Silicon Valley, there's a cult of originality, of being the first to invent something new. Copying is seen as shameful, as evidence of weak creativity. But Ma operated under a different philosophy, one common in Chinese business culture. He believed the best products come from taking existing ideas, studying them carefully, and adapting them to local conditions with relentless attention to user feedback. When Ma launched OICQ in February 1999, he made no pretense that it was original. It was explicitly modeled on ICQ. The name itself acknowledged this. But Ma and his team didn't just translate ICQ into Chinese. They studied every detail of how Chinese users actually communicated online, and they made hundreds of small adjustments that seemed minor individually but added up to a dramatically better user experience. For example, they noticed that Chinese users were more visual and expressive than Western users. So they added colorful avatars and eventually a huge library of emoticons and animated expressions. These became wildly popular, turning conversations into something more playful and emotional than the text-heavy exchanges common in Western instant messaging. They also added the ability to customize your QQ profile with backgrounds, music, and personal information, turning QQ from a simple messaging tool into a form of self-expression and identity. They made QQ work on very slow internet connections, crucial in a China where most people were still using dial-up modems. They optimized the software to use minimal bandwidth and to handle frequent disconnections gracefully. When your connection dropped, QQ would automatically reconnect and retrieve any messages you missed. This reliability made QQ feel dependable in a way that many early internet services did not. Ma also understood something crucial about Chinese internet cafes. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, most Chinese people didn't own computers. They accessed the internet at cafes, which charged by the hour. This meant people used shared computers and couldn't install software that would persist across sessions. Ma made QQ work perfectly in this environment by storing user data on central servers rather than local machines. You could log into your QQ account from any computer and see your full contact list, message history, and profile. This cloud-based approach, which seems obvious now, was pioneering at the time and perfectly suited to how Chinese users actually accessed the internet. The second secret source was Ma's approach to capital allocation and monetization. Many early internet companies, especially in the West, pursued growth at all costs, burning through venture capital to acquire users without a clear plan for profitability. Ma, trained as an accountant's son and shaped by Chinese culture's emphasis on stability, took a more conservative approach. He wanted Tencent to be profitable and sustainable from an early stage, even if that meant growing more slowly. This philosophy was tested immediately. By the end of 1999, QQ had over 1 million registered users, growing at an extraordinary rate. But the company was burning through cash. Servers cost money. Bandwidth cost money. Ma and his co-founders weren't taking salaries, but they still needed to eat. The company was approaching bankruptcy. Many entrepreneurs would have sought venture capital aggressively, giving up equity to fuel growth. Ma did eventually raise VC funding, but first he tried everything else. He looked for revenue models that wouldn't alienate users. He offered premium features like extra storage space and custom ringtones for a small fee. He sold advertising but kept it minimal so it wouldn't degrade the user experience. He explored partnerships with telecommunications companies who saw QQ as a threat but also as an opportunity to keep users on their networks. Most importantly, Ma kept costs extremely low. The 5 founders worked brutal hours, doing everything themselves. They wrote code, managed servers, handled customer service, negotiated partnerships. They operated out of the same small office, eating cheap food, sleeping on cots when deadlines loomed. This scrappy, bootstrapped mentality became part of Tencent's culture and allowed the company to survive when better-funded competitors burned out. When Ma did eventually raise venture capital in 2000 from IDG and PCCW, investing $2.2 million for a 40% stake, he used the capital carefully. He didn't splurge on marketing or fancy offices. He invested in infrastructure, hired more engineers, and improved the product. This discipline meant Tencent reached profitability faster than most internet companies and never became dependent on continuous fundraising. The third secret sauce was Ma's ability to navigate China's unique regulatory environment. Foreign tech companies often struggled in China because they didn't understand how to work within the system. They either ignored Chinese regulations and got blocked, or they tried to comply but did so clumsily. Ma, as a Chinese native who had grown up watching Shenzhen's transformation, understood intuitively how to operate in the gray zones of Chinese policy. He knew that the Chinese government wanted to promote domestic internet companies but also worried about the political implications of free communication. He made sure QQ had systems to monitor and filter problematic content, cooperating with authorities when they requested information. He never positioned Tencent as a platform for free speech or political organizing. Instead, he emphasized QQ's role in promoting economic development and helping families stay connected. This political savvy extended to business relationships. Ma understood the importance of guanxi, the Chinese concept of cultivating relationships and networks. He built connections with government officials, with other successful entrepreneurs, with investors and partners. He was generous with equity and partnerships, preferring to own a smaller piece of a successful ecosystem than to try to control everything himself. He also understood timing. When the Chinese government was encouraging development of certain technologies or industries, Ma moved quickly to align Tencent with those priorities. When regulations tightened in other areas, he pulled back before being forced to. This adaptive, responsive approach allowed Tencent to grow rapidly without triggering the regulatory crackdowns that hit many other Chinese internet companies. The fourth secret sauce was Ma's product philosophy and decision-making process. Unlike many founder CEOs who rely on gut instinct and personal vision, Ma built Tencent around rigorous testing and data analysis. He didn't care about being right. He cared about finding what worked. This meant he was willing to try ideas that seemed strange, to test features that contradicted his own preferences, and to double down on things that users loved even if he personally didn't understand the appeal. This approach became formalized in Tencent's product development process. Teams would build minimum viable versions of features, release them to small user groups, collect detailed data on how people used them, and then iterate rapidly based on what they learned. This was similar to the lean startup methodology that would later become popular in Silicon Valley, but Ma and his team developed it organically out of necessity. For example, when Tencent added QQ Show, a feature that let users buy virtual clothes and accessories for their avatars, Ma was skeptical. Why would people pay real money for digital items that had no practical use? But the data showed that young users loved it. It became one of Tencent's first major revenue streams, generating tens of millions of dollars annually from microtransactions. This success taught Ma to trust user behavior over his own intuitions. The fifth secret sauce was Ma's temperament and management style. Unlike the charismatic, visionary founders common in Western tech, Ma led through patience, persistence, and attention to detail. He avoided the spotlight, rarely gave interviews, and didn't cultivate a personal brand. Instead, he focused on building systems and culture inside Tencent. He created a culture of experimentation where failure was acceptable as long as you learned from it. He encouraged internal competition, allowing multiple teams to work on similar products and letting the best ones win. This led to some duplication and inefficiency, but it also meant Tencent had many shots on goal and could adapt quickly when markets shifted. Ma was also patient with a lowercase p and patient with a capital P. He didn't expect immediate results. He was willing to invest in products and businesses that took years to pay off. When Tencent launched WeChat in 2011, it was the company's fourth attempt at mobile messaging, after 3 previous products had failed. Many CEOs would have given up. Ma kept trying, learning from each failure, until WeChat got the formula right. The 6th secret sauce was network effects and ecosystem thinking. Ma understood early that the most valuable internet businesses are platforms where the value increases as more people use them. Every new QQ user made the service more valuable to existing users because they had more people to talk to. This created a virtuous cycle where success bred more success. But Ma took this further by building an entire ecosystem around QQ. He added games, news, music, email, and eventually e-commerce and payments. Each new service benefited from the existing user base, and each service made users more locked into the ecosystem. This approach, sometimes called a super app strategy, turned Tencent from a messaging company into a comprehensive digital platform that touched every aspect of users' online lives. The key insight was that Ma didn't try to be best at everything. Instead, he often partnered with or acquired the best companies in each category and integrated them into Tencent's ecosystem. This both accelerated Tencent's expansion and made those partner companies more valuable by giving them access to Tencent's massive user base. It was a win-win approach that built loyalty and reduced competition. These 6 secret sources, taken together, explain how Ma built Tencent into one of the world's most valuable companies. It wasn't about having one brilliant insight or making one perfect decision. It was about consistently making good decisions across multiple dimensions, understanding the local context deeply, being disciplined with capital, navigating politics skillfully, trusting data over intuition, leading with patience rather than charisma, and thinking in terms of ecosystems rather than individual products. What makes Ma's story particularly instructive is that none of these advantages were innate or impossible to replicate. They were cultivated through deliberate practice, shaped by Chinese culture and circumstances, and executed with remarkable consistency over decades. Understanding these secret sources helps explain not just Tencent's success, but the broader rise of Chinese technology companies that have built massive businesses by adapting global ideas to local contexts and building comprehensive ecosystems rather than point solutions. Survival and validation, 1998 to 2003. The early years of Tencent were a fight for survival in a rapidly evolving landscape. When Ma and his co-founders launched OICQ in February 1999, China's internet was tiny, experimental, and unprofitable. The dot-com bubble was inflating globally, creating both opportunities and dangers. Foreign investors were pouring money into Chinese internet companies based more on hype than solid business fundamentals. Everyone was optimistic, but nobody really knew which business models would work. OICQ's growth was immediate and shocking. Within 9 months of launch, the service had over 1 million registered users. By the end of 1999, it was the most popular instant messaging service in China. Users loved it. They spent hours every day chatting with friends, joining group conversations, customizing their profiles. For many Chinese people, especially young people in cities, QQ became their primary way of staying connected. But this success created a crisis. The explosive user growth meant Tencent needed more servers, more bandwidth, more technical infrastructure. Costs were skyrocketing, but revenue was almost zero. Ma and his team were working around the clock just to keep the service running while desperately searching for ways to monetize. In March 2000, Ma faced a moment of truth. The company's bank account was nearly empty. He couldn't make payroll. He couldn't pay for servers. He was personally in debt from loans he'd taken to keep Tencent alive. Many entrepreneurs in his position would have given up, taken whatever acquisition offer they could get, or shut down and moved on. Ma considered all these options. He tried to sell QQ to several larger Chinese internet companies, including Sina and Sohu. He pitched it for just $1 million, a fraction of what it would later be worth. Every company passed. They didn't see how to make money from a messaging service. They thought users would eventually move to the next hot thing. They didn't believe the user engagement would last. Being forced to keep the company because nobody would buy it turned out to be the luckiest break of Ma's life. It meant he had to find a way to make QQ profitable, which forced innovations in monetization that would define Tencent's business model. And it meant he retained control and ownership, which would make him one of the richest people in the world a decade later. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In April 2000, Ma finally secured venture capital investment from IDG Capital and Pacific Century Cyberworks, each investing $1.1 million for a 20% stake. This gave Tencent $2.2 million in capital and valued the company at just $5.5 million. The deal required Ma to change the product name from OICQ to QQ, because the original name too closely resembled ICQ and created legal risks. The name change could have been disastrous, confusing users and breaking the brand identity Ma had built. But the team handled it cleverly. They rolled out the rebrand gradually, explained it clearly to users, and actually turned it into an opportunity to refresh the product's image. The new name, QQ, was simpler, catchier, and felt more Chinese. Users adapted quickly, and the brief controversy actually generated publicity that accelerated user growth. With venture capital in the bank, Ma could focus on monetization. The team tried everything. They sold advertising but found that users hated intrusive ads and that Chinese advertisers weren't willing to pay much for online placements yet. They tried charging for premium features like extra storage or faster speeds, but found users resistant to paying directly for what they saw as a basic communication tool. The real breakthroughs came from two sources. First was mobile. Tencent partnered with China Mobile, the dominant mobile carrier, to offer QQ messaging on mobile phones through text messages. This was before smartphones, so the interface was clunky and limited, but it worked. Users paid a small monthly fee to their mobile carrier, which was split with Tencent. This created steady recurring revenue without requiring users to enter credit card information online, which few Chinese consumers had or trusted at the time. Second was virtual goods. In 2003, Tencent launched QQ Show, which allowed users to buy virtual clothing, accessories, and decorations for their avatars. The prices were tiny, often just 1 or 2 yuan, equivalent to about 15 or 25 cents. But millions of users bought them, especially young people who used their avatars as a form of self-expression. This was revolutionary. Tencent had discovered that Chinese internet users would pay for digital items that had no practical function but helped them express their identity and status online. This insight would later drive enormous businesses in online gaming, live streaming, and social media. Tencent was one of the first companies anywhere to prove that virtual goods could be a massive revenue stream. By the end of 2003, Tencent was profitable. The company had over 100 million registered users, though daily active users were lower. Monthly revenue had reached several $1 million. The existential crisis was over. Tencent had survived and validated its business model. But the competitive threats were just beginning. MSN Messenger, Microsoft's competing messaging service, was making aggressive moves into China. Microsoft had resources Tencent couldn't match, global brand recognition, and technical sophistication. Many analysts predicted MSN would crush QQ once Chinese users got access to the superior American product. Yahoo Messenger and AOL Instant Messenger were also entering the Chinese market. Ma's response revealed his strategic thinking. Instead of trying to compete on technical features, where Microsoft might have advantages, he doubled down on understanding and serving Chinese users better than any foreign company could. He added features that seemed frivolous to Western observers but resonated deeply with Chinese users. He built tighter integration with Chinese mobile carriers. He cultivated relationships with Chinese internet cafes to ensure QQ was pre-installed and featured prominently. Most importantly, he leveraged network effects. By the time MSN launched seriously in China, most Chinese internet users already had extensive friend networks on QQ. Switching to MSN meant rebuilding your entire social graph from scratch. The switching costs were prohibitive, especially for a product that wasn't dramatically better. MSN captured some market share among business users and cosmopolitan elites who used it to communicate with international contacts, but it never threatened QQ's dominance among mainstream Chinese users. This era established patterns that would define Tencent for the next 2 decades. Ma showed he could survive existential threats through scrappy resourcefulness. He demonstrated willingness to experiment with unconventional monetization strategies. He proved that understanding local users deeply was a more durable advantage than technical sophistication or brand prestige. And he began building the ecosystem approach that would later make Tencent nearly impossible to compete with. Expansion and controversy, 2004 to 2010. The mid-2000s marked Tencent's transformation from a scrappy startup into a major technology company. In June 2004, Tencent went public on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, raising around $200 million and valuing the company at roughly $6 billion. Ma, who still owned a significant stake, became a billionaire on paper at age 32. The IPO capital allowed Tencent to expand aggressively into new areas. Ma had a vision of QQ becoming not just a messaging platform but a comprehensive portal for everything users did online. He launched or acquired services in online games, news, music, email, search, e-commerce, and more. Each new service leveraged QQ's user base and in turn made QQ more valuable by giving users more reasons to stay within Tencent's ecosystem. Online gaming became especially lucrative. Tencent operated under a business model where games were free to play but users could buy virtual items, power-ups, or cosmetic upgrades. This free-to-play model, pioneered in Asia, generated enormous revenue from a small percentage of heavy spenders while keeping games accessible to everyone. Tencent's games, including QQ game platform and later hits like Crossfire and League of Legends in China, generated billions in annual revenue. But this expansion created intense controversy. Tencent gained a reputation for copying competitors' successful products, launching Tencent versions with minor modifications, and using QQ's massive user base to crush the original innovators. Critics called this the Tencent curse. If you built a successful internet product in China, Tencent would copy it, and your business would die. The most famous case involved a company called 360, which made security software. In 2010, 360 accused Tencent of spying on users and compromising their privacy. Tencent responded by forcing users to choose between running QQ or 360 software, but not both. This hardball tactic, called a forced choice, outraged users and regulators. The public backlash was severe, with many people viewing Tencent as an abusive monopoly that didn't care about users' rights. This controversy forced Ma to reflect deeply on Tencent's strategy and culture. He realized that the company's copying and crushing approach, while effective in the short term, was creating enemies and undermining Tencent's long-term reputation and sustainability. He began shifting toward a more open strategy where Tencent would invest in promising startups and build partnerships rather than always trying to own everything directly. This era also saw Ma navigating increasingly complex political pressures. The Chinese government was tightening control over internet content, requiring companies to monitor and censor discussions of sensitive topics. Tencent built sophisticated content moderation systems, employing thousands of people to review messages and delete problematic content. This made Tencent complicit in censorship, drawing criticism from human rights advocates, but it allowed the company to continue operating and growing in China's regulated environment. The global financial crisis of 2008 presented both challenges and opportunities. Stock markets crashed, and many Chinese companies struggled. But Tencent's business proved remarkably resilient. Because so much of its revenue came from small transactions by millions of users rather than large corporate spending, it weathered the crisis better than advertising-dependent companies. Ma used the crisis to acquire distressed assets and invest in promising startups at attractive valuations. By 2010, Tencent had established itself as one of China's three internet giants along with Alibaba and Baidu. The company's market value had grown to around $50 billion. Ma had evolved from a pure product builder into a business strategist and investor. But he was also aware that Tencent's dominance was vulnerable to disruption, especially from mobile technology, which was beginning to transform how people used the internet. Mobile Revolution and WeChat, 2010 to 2015. The launch of Apple's iPhone in 2007 and subsequent explosion of smartphone adoption created both an existential threat and a historic opportunity for Tencent. Everything that had made QQ dominant on PCs, desktops, and laptops could become irrelevant if users shifted to mobile devices, and Tencent failed to adapt. Ma saw this clearly. He knew that young users were increasingly accessing the internet through smartphones rather than computers. He understood that mobile apps with rich features and touch interfaces could create experiences impossible on PCs. But he also knew that Tencent's first attempts at mobile messaging had failed. The company had launched 3 different mobile products, and none had gained traction. In October 2010, Ma made a crucial decision. He announced an internal competition among multiple Tencent teams to build a mobile messaging product. Whoever built the best one would get resources and support to scale it. This created fierce internal rivalry, with teams working secretly to develop different approaches. Some people thought this was wasteful and chaotic. Ma believed it was the only way to ensure Tencent didn't miss the mobile transition. The winning product emerged from a team led by Alan Zhong, a talented engineer who had joined Tencent when his company, Foxmail, was acquired. Zhong had a vision for a mobile messaging app that was simple, fast, and elegant, very different from QQ's increasingly cluttered interface. He called it Weixin, which means micro-message in Chinese, and it launched in January 2011. The timing was perfect. Chinese smartphone penetration was exploding. Millions of people were buying their first smartphones and looking for apps. Weixin, marketed as WeChat internationally, offered a clean, intuitive experience optimized for mobile. It had voice messaging, which was perfect for Chinese language input on small screens. It had a Moments feature for sharing photos and updates with friends, similar to Facebook's newsfeed. And critically, it worked on any smartphone platform, iPhone or Android, reaching the broadest possible audience. WeChat's growth was staggering. Within 1 year, it had 100 million users. Within 2 years, 300 million. Within 5 years, over 700 million. It became the dominant communication platform in China, overtaking even QQ among young urban users. Ma had successfully navigated Tencent through the mobile transition, one of the hardest challenges for any technology company. But WeChat was much more than a messaging app. Ma and Zhong envisioned it as a comprehensive platform for mobile life. They added features that Western observers found confusing but Chinese users found indispensable. They added official accounts so businesses and media could publish content directly to followers. They added mobile payments, allowing users to send money to friends or pay for goods by scanning QR codes. They added mini-programs, lightweight apps that ran inside WeChat without needing separate installation. The mini-programs were particularly revolutionary. They allowed users to book taxis, order food, buy movie tickets, pay utility bills, donate to charities, play games, and do countless other activities without ever leaving WeChat. This turned WeChat into what Chinese media called a super app, a single application that replaced dozens of separate apps and websites. WeChat's payments feature, called WeChat Pay, became especially important. By making it incredibly easy to send money to friends or pay merchants, WeChat transformed how Chinese people handled money. Within a few years, cash virtually disappeared in major Chinese cities. People paid for everything from street food to luxury goods by scanning QR codes with WeChat. This financial data, showing exactly what people bought and when, gave Tencent unprecedented insights into consumer behavior. The success of WeChat cemented Tencent's position as one of the most valuable and powerful technology companies in the world. By 2015, Tencent's market value exceeded $200 billion. The company employed tens of thousands of people. Ma, still the largest individual shareholder, was one of the richest people in Asia. But the success also attracted regulatory scrutiny. The Chinese government watched nervously as WeChat became essential infrastructure for Chinese society. They worried about the political implications of a private company controlling so much communication and commerce. They increased pressure on Tencent to cooperate with censorship and surveillance, which Tencent did, though this drew criticism from privacy advocates and human rights groups. Ma also faced questions about whether Tencent was becoming too powerful and whether its dominance was stifling innovation. Smaller companies complained that competing with Tencent was impossible because WeChat could simply copy any successful idea and distribute it to hundreds of millions of users instantly. Ma responded by opening WeChat's platform and investing heavily in other companies rather than always trying to build everything internally, but the tensions remained. This era demonstrated Ma's ability to adapt to paradigm shifts. He recognized the mobile threat early, set up internal competition to find the best solution, backed the winning team aggressively, and then expanded the product beyond its initial scope into a comprehensive platform. It was strategic vision combined with operational excellence and willingness to cannibalize Tencent's existing products to capture the future. Gaming dominance and international expansion, 2015 to 2020. While WeChat captured attention as Tencent's most visible product, gaming quietly became the company's largest revenue source. By 2015, Tencent was the world's largest gaming company by revenue, generating over $10 billion annually from games. This dominance came from a combination of hit titles, smart acquisitions, and the free-to-play business model that Tencent had mastered. Tencent's gaming strategy had three components. First, operate popular games in China through licensing deals or original development. Second, invest in or acquire the world's best gaming studios. Third, leverage Tencent's social platforms and payment systems to maximize engagement and monetization. This strategy turned gaming from a niche entertainment category into one of the most lucrative businesses in China. Some of Tencent's biggest gaming hits included Honor of Kings, a mobile multiplayer battle game that became a cultural phenomenon in China, and League of Legends and Crossfire, which Tencent operated under license. Honor of Kings alone generated billions in annual revenue from in-game purchases of character skins, power-ups, and cosmetic items. But Ma recognized that sustaining gaming leadership required more than operating hit titles in China. He began making aggressive international investments to secure access to top gaming talent and intellectual property. In 2015, Tencent acquired Riot Games, the American developer of League of Legends, for around $400 million. In 2016, Tencent bought Supercell, the Finnish company behind Clash of Clans, for over $8 billion. These acquisitions gave Tencent stakes in the most successful games globally. Tencent also took significant minority stakes in Epic Games, maker of Fortnite, Activision Blizzard, Ubisoft, and dozens of other gaming companies worldwide. This investment strategy, which Ma called buying the best seats at the table, gave Tencent exposure to the industry's successes without requiring full control. It also built relationships and goodwill with Western gaming companies who might otherwise view Tencent as a threat. These investments paid off spectacularly. When games like Fortnite or PUBG became global hits, Tencent benefited financially. When Tencent wanted to launch games in China, it had relationships with the world's best developers. The strategy demonstrated Ma's evolution from pure operator to sophisticated investor and capital allocator. During this period, Tencent also invested heavily in other technology sectors beyond gaming. Ma put billions into e-commerce through stakes in JD.com and Pindu Audio. He invested in mobility through Didi Chuxing, China's dominant ride-hailing company. He backed food delivery through Meituan, content platforms through streaming services and news apps, and frontier technologies like artificial intelligence and cloud computing. This portfolio approach meant Tencent was positioned to benefit from the growth of China's entire digital economy, not just social networking and gaming. It also created an ecosystem where Tencent's various investments could work together, with WeChat providing traffic and payments while portfolio companies provided specialized services. However, international expansion beyond investments proved challenging. Tencent tried to launch WeChat in Western markets but failed to gain meaningful traction outside Chinese diaspora communities. Americans and Europeans already used WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, or iMessage. The network effects that made WeChat dominant in China worked against it abroad, where few people had friends on the platform. Ma learned that cultural and regulatory differences made direct expansion difficult. Chinese products optimized for Chinese users' preferences, high tolerance for feature density, comfort with in-app commerce, didn't translate well to markets with different expectations. Tencent censorship and data practices, necessary for operating in China, raised privacy concerns in Western markets and drew regulatory scrutiny. The trade-off was significant. By building products specifically for Chinese users and accepting Chinese government oversight, Tencent had created unmatched dominance in the world's largest internet market. But these same choices made international expansion nearly impossible. Ma accepted this trade-off, focusing on China plus strategic investments abroad rather than trying to compete directly with Facebook, Google, and other Western giants in their home markets. By 2020, Tencent's market value exceeded $500 billion, making it one of the 10 most valuable companies globally. Ma's personal wealth exceeded $50 billion. Tencent employed over 60,000 people. WeChat had over 1 billion active users. The company's games reached hundreds of millions of players worldwide. From every angle, Tencent was a staggering success. But new challenges were emerging. The Chinese government was increasing scrutiny of big technology companies, concerned about their power and influence. Regulatory crackdowns on gaming, fintech, and other sectors threatened Tencent's growth. Competition from ByteDance, the company behind TikTok and Douyin, was eroding Tencent's dominance in social media and entertainment. And questions about Tencent's role in Chinese society, from censorship to addiction to inequality, were becoming harder to ignore. Regulatory reckoning and adaptation, 2020 to present. The year 2020 marked a turning point not just for Tencent but for all of China's major technology companies. After years of encouraging rapid growth and tolerating increasingly powerful private tech firms, the Chinese government began what observers called a regulatory crackdown. The shift was dramatic and caught many by surprise, but the warning signs had been building for years. The catalyst was complex. Chinese leaders worried that tech companies had accumulated too much power over data, finance, and public discourse. They saw how American tech giants influenced politics and society, and they didn't want Chinese companies to have similar autonomy. They were concerned about issues like gaming addiction among young people, predatory lending through fintech platforms, labor conditions for gig workers, and monopolistic practices that stifled competition. For Tencent specifically, several issues drew regulatory attention. First was gaming. Government officials worried that games like Honor of Kings were addictive and harming children's academic performance and mental health. In 2021, state media called online games spiritual opium and electronic drugs, signaling that major restrictions were coming. The government implemented strict limits on how many hours per week minors could play games, devastating the business model for youth-focused titles. Second was fintech. Tencent's WeChat Pay competed directly with Ant Financial's Alipay, and together they dominated mobile payments in China. Regulators worried this gave private companies too much control over financial infrastructure and data. They forced both companies to share data with a government-backed credit scoring system and imposed restrictions on how they could use financial information. Third was content and censorship. While Tencent had always cooperated with censorship requirements, the government wanted even tighter control as political sensitivity increased under President Xi Jinping. WeChat and QQ faced pressure to monitor not just public posts but private messages, creating ethical dilemmas and technical challenges. Fourth was antitrust. Regulators investigated whether Tencent's investments in competitors like JD and Pinduoduo, along with exclusive partnerships, violated competition law. They banned certain practices like forcing merchants to choose exclusively between platforms. They fined Tencent and other tech giants billions of yuan for past violations. The impact on Tencent was severe. The company's stock price fell by nearly 50% from its peak in early 2021. Growth slowed dramatically as gaming revenue declined and new regulations limited expansion opportunities. Ma, who had always carefully managed relationships with government officials, suddenly found Tencent in the regulatory crosshairs despite his best efforts at compliance. Ma's response demonstrated his adaptability and long-term thinking. Rather than fight the regulations or complain publicly, which would have been suicidal, he embraced them enthusiastically. He announced that Tencent would invest billions in social responsibility initiatives that aligned with government priorities. He committed funds to rural development, scientific research, education, and cultural preservation, areas the government wanted to strengthen. He also restructured Tencent's business to reduce dependence on gaming and consumer internet, shifting toward enterprise services and business-to-business products that faced less political sensitivity. Tencent Cloud, the company's cloud computing service, received major investments to compete with Alibaba Cloud and attract enterprise customers. The logic was that selling infrastructure and services to businesses was less politically sensitive than operating consumer platforms that shaped culture and behavior. Tencent also became more conservative about acquisitions and investments, understanding that assembling a portfolio of competing platforms now looked like monopolistic behavior rather than smart strategy. The company divested some holdings, reduced its ownership stakes in others, and generally tried to appear less dominant and threatening. Ma personally stepped back from public visibility even more than before. He stopped appearing at conferences, rarely gave interviews, and let other executives represent the company. This wasn't cowardice but calculation. Chinese culture and politics favor modesty and deference to authority. By lowering his profile, Ma reduced the target on Tencent's back and signaled compliance with the new regulatory environment. The strategy appeared to work, at least partially. By 2023, the worst of the crackdown seemed to have passed. Regulation stabilized, allowing companies to plan again. Tencent's stock price recovered somewhat, though it remained well below its peak. The company returned to modest growth, though nothing like the explosive expansion of previous years. But the experience fundamentally changed Tencent and Ma's approach. The era of aggressive expansion was over. The assumption that the government would let tech companies grow unchecked had been shattered. Ma now operated with the understanding that Tencent's continued existence depended on political acceptance, not just business success. Profitability mattered, but so did serving government priorities and avoiding behaviors that made officials nervous. This created difficult trade-offs. Tencent's censorship and surveillance systems became even more sophisticated and aggressive, drawing criticism from human rights groups and users who valued privacy. The company's ability to innovate and experiment was constrained by the need to get regulatory approval for new products and features. Employee morale suffered as the company culture shifted from growth-focused to compliance-focused. Yet Tencent survived when some observers predicted the government might break it up or nationalize it. Ma kept control of the company he'd founded rather than being forced out like Jack Ma, Alibaba's founder, who disappeared from public view after criticizing regulators. Tencent remained hugely profitable, generating tens of billions in annual profit even with slower growth. And Ma remained one of the world's wealthiest individuals, though he kept an increasingly low profile. This most recent era revealed both Ma's strengths and the limits of his power. His political savvy and willingness to adapt allowed Tencent to survive regulatory pressure that destroyed other companies. His patient temperament served him well, as he didn't panic or make defensive moves that would have worsened the situation. His long-term relationships and reputation for cooperation brought goodwill when it mattered most. But it also showed that no amount of business success or personal wealth could insulate a Chinese entrepreneur from political risk. Ma had built one of the world's most successful companies, created hundreds of billions in value, employed tens of thousands of people, and yet his control over Tencent's destiny was limited by decisions made in government offices in Beijing. This is the fundamental reality of doing business in China, something Ma understood intellectually but experienced viscerally during this period. Tencent, from startup to conglomerate. The organization Ma built is itself a character in this story, evolving from 5 founders in a tiny office to a sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in nearly every corner of China's digital economy. Understanding Tencent's organizational evolution reveals how Ma's management philosophy translated into culture, structure, and sustained performance. In the early years from 1998 to 2004, Tencent operated as a typical startup. The The 5 founders did everything themselves, working brutal hours with minimal hierarchy or formal processes. Decisions were made quickly through consensus, usually with Ma having final say but listening carefully to his co-founders' views. The culture was scrappy, resourceful, and focused on survival. As the company grew and went public, Ma faced a choice that confronts every successful founder. Should he maintain centralized control and impose his vision top-down? Or should he decentralize authority and let different parts of the company operate semi-independently? Ma chose decentralization, which was unusual for Chinese companies where strong centralized leadership is the norm. He organized Tencent into business groups with significant autonomy. The gaming group could make decisions about which games to develop or acquire without getting approval from corporate headquarters for every choice. The WeChat group operated almost like an independent company, with its own product roadmap and business strategy. The cloud computing group had freedom to pursue enterprise customers and build partnerships. This structure created internal competition that sometimes felt wasteful. Multiple groups would work on similar products, duplicating effort. Resources weren't always allocated optimally. Coordination across groups was challenging. But Ma believed the benefits outweighed the costs. Decentralization allowed Tencent to move faster, experiment more freely, and avoid the sclerosis that often afflicts large organizations. The most famous example was WeChat's development. The team led by Alan Zhong operated independently, competing against other internal teams also trying to build mobile messaging products. Zhong didn't have to convince senior management that every feature made sense. He could test ideas quickly with real users and iterate based on data. This autonomy allowed WeChat to develop its distinctive character and move faster than if it had been managed by committee. Ma also built a culture around what he called boring management. This meant no charismatic leadership, no inspiring visions announced at company-wide meetings, no cult of personality. Instead, Tencent focused on metrics, testing, iteration, and gradual improvement. Every product decision should be based on data showing how users actually behaved, not assumptions about what they wanted. This philosophy extended to hiring and promotion. Tencent looked for people who were smart, hardworking, and collaborative, but not necessarily visionaries or creative geniuses. The company wanted solid engineers who could execute well, product managers who could analyze data effectively, and business leaders who could build partnerships and manage complexity. Brilliance was nice, but reliability was essential. The compensation system reflected this culture. Tencent paid well but not extravagantly by Silicon Valley standards. Employees received competitive salaries plus equity, creating long-term alignment. But there weren't huge individual bonuses for superstar performers. The message was that success came from teams executing well over time, not individuals making brilliant calls. This approach had strengths and weaknesses. The strengths were consistency, scalability, and risk management. Tencent could operate dozens of products across multiple business lines without depending on any single leader's genius. The company could survive departures of key people because processes and data systems captured institutional knowledge. Growth was steady and predictable rather than boom and bust. The weaknesses were less obvious but real. Tencent sometimes lacked the bold innovation that comes from visionary leaders willing to bet everything on unproven ideas. The company's best products were often refinements of existing concepts rather than radical inventions. WeChat improved on mobile messaging. Honor of Kings refined the multiplayer battle arena genre. Tencent was great at execution but less impressive at imagination. Critics also pointed to Tencent's reputation for copying competitors' innovations rather than creating its own. This wasn't just individual products but a broader organizational tendency. When someone else proved a business model worked, Tencent would quickly launch its own version and use its distribution advantages to dominate the market. This was effective but raised questions about whether Tencent was truly innovative or just a skilled imitator. Ma defended this approach by arguing that users didn't care about originality, they cared about quality and convenience. If Tencent could take an idea and execute it better, integrate it more smoothly into users' digital lives, and deliver it to hundreds of millions of people, that created real value even if the core concept wasn't original. He believed the Western tech industry's obsession with innovation for its own sake was misguided. Key portfolio companies and investments. Beyond operating businesses, Tencent became one of the world's most active and successful technology investors. Ma's investment strategy revealed his thinking about markets, risk, and value creation. Rather than trying to own and control everything, he preferred taking strategic stakes in the best companies across various sectors, creating a portfolio that captured the growth of China's entire digital economy. The investment approach had several principles. First, invest in areas where Tencent had strategic interest but didn't need to operate directly. Gaming studios, e-commerce platforms, content creators, and enterprise software companies could all complement Tencent's core businesses without requiring Tencent to manage them day to day. Second, back exceptional entrepreneurs even when their ideas seemed risky. Ma understood that he couldn't predict exactly which companies would succeed, but he could identify talented founders with strong execution abilities. He was willing to bet on people rather than just business plans. Third, be a value-added investor, not just a source of capital. Tencent could offer portfolio companies access to WeChat's user base, integration with Tencent's payments and advertising systems, introductions to other partners, and strategic advice based on Tencent's experience scaling internet businesses in China. Fourth, take minority stakes and give founders control. Unlike some investors who demanded board seats and veto rights, Tencent often invested without requiring operational control. This built trust and loyalty, making founders more willing to partner with Tencent rather than viewing it as a threat. Some of Tencent's most significant investments included JD.com, where Tencent invested billions and held around 20% ownership. This gave Tencent exposure to e-commerce, which Alibaba dominated, without having to build its own marketplace from scratch. JD benefited from integration with WeChat, where users could access JD's store directly, driving enormous traffic. Meituan, the food delivery and local services giant, received major investment from Tencent. This positioned Tencent in the on-demand economy and created synergies with WeChat, where users could order food or book services without leaving the app. Meituan went public in 2018 valued at over $50 billion, generating huge returns for Tencent. Pinduoduo, the social commerce platform that challenged Alibaba by focusing on lower-tier cities and group buying, also had Tencent backing. This bet on a different e-commerce model proved prescient as Pinduoduo grew explosively, reaching hundreds of millions of users and achieving profitability faster than analysts expected. In mobility, Tencent's investment in Didi Chuxing helped the company defeat Uber in China and become the dominant ride-hailing platform. Tencent's capital and WeChat integration were crucial competitive advantages during the fierce subsidy wars that characterized China's ride-hailing market. Internationally, Tencent's gaming investments in Riot Games, Supercell, Epic Games, and dozens of others created exposure to the global gaming industry's growth. These investments generated strong returns financially, but more importantly, they gave Tencent relationships with the world's best game developers and insights into global gaming trends. The investment strategy wasn't without failures. Tencent invested in companies that went bankrupt, pivoted unsuccessfully, or simply returned mediocre results. Some bets on new technologies like virtual reality or early-stage blockchain companies didn't pay off. The hit rate wasn't perfect. But overall, Tencent's investment portfolio generated exceptional returns. By 2020, the publicly disclosed value of Tencent's equity investments exceeded $100 billion. Including private investments and stakes that had been sold, Tencent had created hundreds of billions in value through its investment activities, arguably matching or exceeding the value created by its operating businesses. This success reflected Ma's evolution from pure operator to sophisticated capital allocator. He recognized that Tencent couldn't be best at everything, so he found the best people in each domain and backed them. He created a portfolio that captured optionality across multiple paths for how China's digital economy might evolve. And he built an ecosystem where Tencent's platforms and its portfolio companies reinforced each other, creating network effects that made the whole more valuable than the sum of parts. Where things stand today. As of late 2024, Pony Ma is 53 years old and remains CEO and largest individual shareholder of Tencent, though his stake has decreased over time through share sales and equity compensation to employees. He owns approximately 8% of Tencent, worth around $40 billion at current valuations. His total wealth, including other investments, exceeds $50 billion, making him one of the 30 richest people globally. Tencent's market capitalization fluctuates around $400 billion to $500 billion, depending on market conditions and regulatory sentiment. The company generates over $80 billion in annual revenue and around $20 billion in profit. It employs over 100,000 people globally. WeChat has over 1.3 billion monthly active users. Tencent's games reach hundreds of millions of players. The company's cloud computing and business services divisions are growing, though still smaller than consumer businesses. Ma's daily routine remains remarkably consistent with his early years. He arrives at Tencent Shenzhen headquarters early, often before most employees. He spends hours reviewing data on how users interact with Tencent's products, looking for patterns and anomalies. He meets with product teams, asking detailed questions about feature performance and user feedback. He reviews investment opportunities and meets with founders of potential portfolio companies. He rarely gives public speeches or interviews. When he does appear publicly, usually at Tencent's annual meetings or major industry conferences, his style is understated and data-focused. He presents charts and metrics rather than inspirational visions. He acknowledges challenges frankly rather than spinning problems as opportunities. This low-key approach contrasts sharply with the showmanship of Western tech CEOs but fits Chinese cultural norms around humility and deference. Ma's personal life remains private. He's married to Wang Dantang, his college sweetheart, and they have children, though he rarely discusses his family publicly. He lives in Shenzhen, not in one of the flashy mansions that Chinese billionaires often build, but in a relatively modest apartment by billionaire standards. He doesn't own yachts or private islands. His lifestyle is comfortable but not ostentatious. Friends and colleagues describe Ma as quiet, thoughtful, and intensely curious about technology and human behavior. He reads extensively, especially about science, history, and psychology. He's interested in astronomy still, keeping telescopes and staying current on astrophysics developments. He thinks in systems and patterns, always looking for underlying structures that explain surface phenomena. He's also described as stubborn in a particular way. When data convinces him something is true, he's very difficult to move from that position. But he's quite willing to change his mind when new data emerges. This combination of conviction based on evidence plus openness to new evidence creates a decision-making style that's both decisive and flexible. Investment philosophy crystallized. After more than 25 years building and running Tencent, Ma's investment philosophy has crystallized into several core principles. These aren't abstract theories but lessons learned through direct experience, validated across hundreds of investments and business decisions. Principle 1 is that user behavior matters more than technology elegance. Ma learned early that the technically best solution doesn't always win. What wins is the product that best fits how users actually behave, even if that behavior seems irrational or suboptimal to engineers. QQ succeeded not because its code was most efficient but because it understood what Chinese users wanted from online communication. WeChat won because it made common tasks, sending messages, sharing photos, paying friends, incredibly easy, not because it had the most sophisticated architecture. This principle shaped how Tencent develops products. Teams spend enormous time studying user behavior through data analysis and direct observation. They A/B test everything, trying multiple versions of features to see which ones users prefer. They're willing to add features that seem cluttered or unnecessary to product purists if users demonstrably want them. The user is always right, even when they're objectively wrong by some technical standard. Principle 2 is that network effects and ecosystems beat point solutions. Ma understood early that the most defensible businesses are platforms where value increases as more people use them. This isn't just about scale economies or brand recognition. It's about creating situations where users can't easily leave because their friends, data, and habits are all locked into the platform. Tencent applied this insight systematically. QQ's value came from your friend network being there. WeChat's power came from its integration across messaging, payments, mini-programs, making it the center of digital life. Tencent's gaming business benefited from social features that let friends play together. Everything was designed to increase switching costs and deepen user entrenchment. The ecosystem thinking extended beyond individual products. Ma saw Tencent's portfolio of investments as creating an ecosystem where different companies reinforced each other. JD for e-commerce, Meituan for food delivery, Didi for transportation, all integrated with WeChat, all using WeChat Pay, all benefiting from Tencent's user base. This made each investment more valuable and made the whole ecosystem more defensible against competition. Principle 3 is that copying and improving beats inventing from scratch. This is perhaps Ma's most controversial principle, especially in Western business culture that celebrates innovation and first-mover advantage. Ma doesn't apologize for it. He believes that adapting proven ideas to local conditions with better execution creates more value than pursuing radical innovation that usually fails. The evidence supports him. QQ adapted ICQ for Chinese users. WeChat learned from WhatsApp and Line and KakaoTalk. Honor of Kings refined mechanics from League of Legends for mobile. In each case, Tencent wasn't first, but it won by understanding users better and executing better. Ma argues this approach is more reliable and scalable than betting everything on untested ideas. The counter-argument is that this approach only works when you have distribution advantages to overcome your late entry. Tencent could launch copycat products and use its existing user base to bootstrap them. A startup without those advantages would be crushed. Ma acknowledges this but points out that building those distribution advantages required decades of work and numerous successes. Tencent earned the right to leverage its platforms. Principle 4 is that patience is a competitive advantage. Ma's temperament naturally inclines toward long-term thinking, and he built this into Tencent's culture and strategy. The company is willing to invest in products, technologies, and businesses that take years to pay off. It doesn't panic during short-term setbacks or chase short-term opportunities that don't fit long-term strategy. This patience manifested in multiple ways. Tencent invested heavily in WeChat for years before it became profitable. The company bought stakes in gaming companies and held them through industry cycles. It built cloud computing infrastructure before demand materialized. It maintained relationships with entrepreneurs and partners across decades, not just during active deals. The patience also applied to personal decisions. Ma didn't cash out and retire when he became wealthy. He didn't pursue flashy acquisitions or pivots to chase trends. He kept grinding on improving products, expanding ecosystems, and strengthening Tencent's position incrementally. This long-term orientation, rare in an industry obsessed with quarterly results, created sustained advantage. Principle 5 is that data-driven decisions beat intuition-driven decisions. This might seem obvious, but it's harder to apply consistently than it sounds. Trusting data means sometimes doing things that feel wrong intuitively. It means admitting you were wrong when data contradicts your beliefs. It means investing in measurement infrastructure even when resources are tight. Ma embedded this principle deeply in Tencent's operations. Product teams couldn't launch features based on gut feeling. They needed data showing users wanted it. Investments required financial models and market analysis, not just exciting pitches. Performance reviews used objective metrics, not subjective assessments. This created a culture where arguments had to be backed by evidence, reducing politics and increasing quality of decision-making. The limitation is that data shows what users do now, not necessarily what they'll want in the future. Truly revolutionary products, iPhones, Teslas, often require vision that goes beyond current user behavior. Ma acknowledged this but argued that most product decisions aren't revolutionary, they're incremental, and incremental decisions should be data-driven. Save intuition for the rare moments when you're really inventing something new. Principle 6 is that talent density matters more than total headcount. As Tencent grew, Ma resisted the temptation to hire massively and build a huge organization. He preferred smaller teams of exceptionally capable people over large teams of average performers. This kept decision-making fast, reduced bureaucracy, and maintained quality. Tencent paid well to attract top talent and gave them significant autonomy and resources. But it also had high standards and wasn't afraid to let people go who didn't perform. The culture was demanding, with long hours and high expectations. This wasn't for everyone, but it attracted ambitious, capable people who wanted to work on hard problems at massive scale. Principle 7 is that political and regulatory risk must be managed proactively. This lesson, learned painfully during recent regulatory crackdowns, shaped how Ma now thinks about business strategy. You can't just focus on building great products and winning markets. You have to anticipate how government officials will react, maintain good relationships with regulators, and adjust strategy when political winds shift. This doesn't mean being paralyzed by political risk or abandoning business logic. It means factoring political considerations into decisions alongside financial and strategic factors. It means sometimes leaving money on the table or slowing growth to avoid attracting negative attention. It means contributing to social goals that government prioritizes even when they don't maximize shareholder value. Operating in China requires this mindset. These 7 principles, taken together, explain how Ma built and sustained Tencent's success across multiple eras and business lines. They are not revolutionary insights. In fact, their power comes partly from being executable and practical rather than visionary and inspiring. They represent accumulated wisdom from decades of experience, codified into frameworks that guide thousands of daily decisions. Investment lessons. Lesson 1 is that understanding users deeply beats having better technology. Ma's career demonstrates this repeatedly. QQ wasn't technically superior to ICQ or MSN Messenger. What made it win was better understanding of Chinese users, their preferences for colorful interfaces, their need to work on shared computers, their comfort with virtual goods. WeChat succeeded not through technical innovation but through perfect alignment with how Chinese people wanted to use mobile devices. The lesson is to spend more time studying users and less time optimizing code elegance. The mechanism is simple. Technology gets commoditized over time. What you can build today, competitors can copy tomorrow. But deep understanding of user psychology, cultural context, and behavioral patterns is harder to replicate. It comes from immersion in the market, from thousands of hours observing and talking to users, from cultural fluency that outsiders can't easily acquire. This knowledge compounds over time while technical advantages erode. The application today is to prioritize user research and behavioral data over engineering preferences. Ship products based on what users demonstrably want, not what makes technical sense. Test everything with real users before committing resources. Accept that you'll often be wrong about what works, and let data correct your mistakes. Build systems for learning from users continuously, not just during initial product development. The psychology of why this is hard is that engineers and founders often fall in love with technical elegance. They want to build the theoretically best solution, even if users don't appreciate or need it. They rationalize that users just don't understand yet, that with better education users will appreciate the superior approach. But users don't care about your technical achievements. They care about whether your product makes their lives easier or more enjoyable. Lesson 2 is that switching costs and lock-in create the most defensible businesses. Ma understood early that competitive advantage comes not from being a little better but from making it painful for users to leave. QQ achieved this through friend networks. If all your friends used QQ, switching to another messaging service meant losing contact with them. WeChat deepened this through integrating payments, mini-programs, official accounts, creating dozens of reasons people couldn't leave even if they wanted to. The evidence shows that businesses with high switching costs sustain profits far longer than businesses competing purely on price or features. Tencent maintained dominance in messaging for over 2 decades, not because nobody built competing products, but because the costs of switching were prohibitive. Users would need to recreate social graphs, repay friends through new systems, reinstall mini-programs, essentially rebuild their digital lives. Very few were willing to do this even when better alternatives existed. The boundary condition is that this only works when you're already dominant. Creating switching costs requires users first, and getting users initially requires being better or cheaper or more convenient than alternatives. The lesson isn't to start by trying to lock users in. It's to build great products that attract users, then systematically increase switching costs as you gain scale. The application today is to think about lock-in from day one. What features could make your product sticky? How can you make users invest time or data or social capital in your platform? Can you integrate with other services users depend on? Can you build network effects where value increases with scale? These questions should guide product development as much as feature lists and technical architecture. Lesson 3 is that patient capital and long-time horizons beat urgent capital and short-time horizons. Ma's willingness to invest years in products before expecting returns gave Tencent huge advantages. WeChat took years to monetize. Cloud computing required massive upfront investment with distant payoffs. Gaming investments took time to mature. But because Ma wasn't desperate for quick wins, he could make these investments while competitors, under pressure from investors demanding immediate results, couldn't. The mechanism is that most valuable opportunities require time to develop. Building trust with users takes time. Achieving product market fit requires iteration. Network effects need scale. Competitors distracted by short-term pressures can't make these investments, creating space for patient companies to win long-term. The patient company compounds advantages while impatient companies chase quarterly results. The psychological challenge is that patience is painful. You watch competitors grow faster in the short term. You endure criticism from investors or media questioning your strategy. You see opportunities you're not pursuing because they don't fit long-term plans. It requires conviction and emotional discipline to stay patient when others are moving fast. The application today is to explicitly design for long-term value creation. Use long vesting schedules for equity compensation to encourage employee retention. Set strategic goals over 3 to 5 years, not quarters. Invest in capabilities like data infrastructure or user research that pay off slowly. Accept slower growth if it means better unit economics or stronger competitive position. The hardest part is maintaining this orientation when markets reward short-term thinking. Lesson 4 is that copying and improving is a viable strategy, especially in fast-growing markets. Ma never apologized for Tencent's imitation strategy, and the results validated him. In fast-growing markets, execution matters more than originality. Users care about quality and convenience, not who thought of the idea first. Being second with a better product beats being first with a mediocre one. The evidence is overwhelming. QQ adapted ICQ and crushed it in China. WeChat learned from multiple messaging apps and became more valuable than any of them. Honor of Kings refined existing game mechanics and generated more revenue than its inspirations. Google wasn't the first search engine, Facebook wasn't the first social network, Amazon wasn't the first e-commerce site. Second movers with better execution win regularly. The boundary is that this strategy requires distribution advantages or execution excellence that first movers lack. You can't just copy and expect to win. You need some other advantage, whether that's better understanding of local users, more capital to invest in growth, superior technology infrastructure, or an existing platform to bootstrap from. Tencent had these advantages, which let its imitation strategy work. The application today is to study competitors ruthlessly. When someone proves a business model works, analyze why and how to do it better. Don't be paralyzed by originality requirements. Focus on execution excellence and user satisfaction rather than novelty. Most businesses aren't built on radical innovation but on doing known things better than incumbents. Lesson 5 is that talent density and small teams beat large organizations with average people. Ma kept Tencent relatively lean even as it grew enormous. He preferred giving small teams of excellent people big responsibilities over building large bureaucracies. This kept decision-making fast, maintained quality, and attracted ambitious people who wanted ownership. The mechanism is that talented people want to work with other talented people on important problems with real autonomy. Diluting talent with mediocre performers demotivates the best people and slows everything down. Communication overhead grows quadratically with team size, making large teams inefficient. Better to pay more for fewer exceptional people than pay less for many average ones. The The psychological difficulty is that hiring is hard and firing is harder. It's easier to lower standards and grow headcount than to maintain high bars and stay small. It's politically difficult to have small, elite teams when other managers are building empires. But the discipline of staying small and selective pays off in velocity and quality. The application today is to hire slowly and carefully. Set very high bars for talent, not just technical skills but judgment, communication, and cultural fit. Give small teams big problems and real authority. Pay well but demand excellence. Don't be afraid to let people go who aren't performing at the level needed. Build a reputation that attracts other talented people who want to work with the best. Lesson 6 is that data and testing beat opinions and arguments. Ma institutionalized this at Tencent. Product decisions required data. Marketing spending required measurement. Investments needed models. This reduced politics, improved decision quality, and created accountability. When everyone uses the same objective metrics, it's harder to argue based on seniority or charisma. The boundary is that some decisions, especially about future opportunities or revolutionary products, can't be purely data-driven. You need judgment and intuition when operating in uncertainty. The key is knowing which decisions should be data-driven and which require intuition, and being explicit about which mode you're operating in. The application today is to invest heavily in measurement infrastructure. Build systems to track user behavior, run A/B tests, and analyze results. Make data accessible to everyone, not just analysts. Create a culture where asking for data to support claims is normal. But also recognize limits of data and give space for intuitive leaps when data is insufficient. Lesson 7 is that political and regulatory risk can destroy businesses faster than competition. Ma learned this painfully when Chinese regulators cracked down on tech companies. All the business success, market dominance, and innovation couldn't protect Tencent from political decisions. This risk is especially acute in China but exists everywhere, as American and European tech companies are discovering with increasing regulation. The mechanism is that governments ultimately control the rules businesses operate under. When political priorities shift, yesterday's encouraged behavior becomes tomorrow's prohibited practice. Companies that don't adapt quickly face fines, forced restructuring, or shutdown. No amount of profitability or user love provides immunity. The application today is to proactively manage political risk. Maintain relationships with regulators. Anticipate where regulation might tighten and adjust before being forced to. Contribute to social goals governments prioritize, even when it reduces profitability. Accept that in some markets, especially China, maintaining political acceptability is as important as satisfying users or beating competitors. Life lessons beyond investing. Ma's journey offers insights beyond business strategy. His life demonstrates patterns about success, fulfillment, and the costs of achievement that apply to anyone pursuing ambitious goals. Lesson 1 on success is that temperament matters as much as intelligence. Ma succeeded partly because his personality, patient, data-driven, emotionally stable, fit the requirements of building lasting businesses. Many brilliant people fail because they're impulsive, emotional, or inconsistent. Ma's boringness, his lack of drama and charisma, became an asset rather than a liability. The evidence shows that many of the most successful investors and entrepreneurs aren't the most brilliant but the most psychologically suited to long-term value creation. They can withstand criticism, maintain conviction through volatility, learn from failures without being destroyed by them, and stay focused on goals over decades. These psychological traits often matter more than raw intelligence. The application is to understand your own temperament and find paths that leverage your psychological strengths. If you're impulsive and creative, pursue opportunities requiring vision and rapid iteration. If you're patient and analytical, pursue opportunities requiring sustained execution. Don't try to be someone you're not, but also work on psychological weaknesses that limit you. Lesson 2 on failure is that failures compound into wisdom if you extract lessons. Ma had many failures, product launches that flopped, investments that lost money, strategies that didn't work. But he systematically analyzed each failure to understand what went wrong and how to avoid similar mistakes. This turned failures into assets, into knowledge that competitors lacked. The mechanism is simple but hard to execute. After failures, most people rationalize them away, blame external factors, or simply move on without reflection. Ma forced himself and his teams to do painful post-mortems, acknowledging mistakes and extracting lessons. This created an organizational learning system that got smarter over time. The application is to create rituals around learning from failure. After projects fail, write detailed analyses of what went wrong and what you'd do differently. Share these honestly with teams, modeling vulnerability and creating psychological safety. Treat failures as tuition paid to reality, valuable if you extract the lessons. Lesson 3 on relationships is that partnerships and networks compound value over decades. Ma's relationships with his 4 co-founders, with early investors like IDG, with entrepreneurs he backed, with regulators and government officials, all paid dividends over many years. He invested in relationships when there was no immediate benefit, building trust and goodwill that became valuable later. The mechanism is that strong relationships create optionality. When opportunities arise, people think of you and reach out. When problems emerge, people help. When information flows, you're in the network. This compounds over time as your reputation spreads and relationships deepen. But it requires genuine care about others' success, not just transactional networking. The application is to think about relationships as long-term investments. Help people without expecting immediate returns. Stay in touch even when you don't need anything. Build reputation for integrity and reliability. Over decades, this creates a network that becomes one of your most valuable assets. Lesson 4 on meaning is that beyond some threshold, more wealth doesn't increase happiness but purpose does. Ma is extraordinarily wealthy, but his lifestyle is modest. He doesn't seem motivated by accumulating more money. Instead, he finds meaning in building products people love, in solving hard problems, in seeing Tencent's impact on Chinese society. The wealth is a byproduct, not the goal. The evidence from happiness research supports this. Beyond a comfortable level, additional money has diminishing returns on life satisfaction. What matters more is autonomy, mastery, purpose, and relationships. Ma structured his life around work he finds intrinsically interesting with people he respects, pursuing goals he thinks matter. The money enabled independence but didn't define success. The application is to ask what actually motivates you beyond money. What problems do you want to solve? What impact do you want to have? What would you work on if money didn't matter? Structure your life and career around those answers, using money as a tool to enable the work rather than as the definition of success. Legacy and contemporary impact. In 50 years, when people study early 21st century technology and business, Pony Ma and Tencent will occupy a significant place in that history for several reasons. First, Ma demonstrated that Chinese companies could build products as sophisticated and successful as Western counterparts, challenging assumptions about innovation requiring Western liberal culture. Tencent proved that different cultural contexts could generate different forms of innovation, that copying and improving could be as valuable as inventing from scratch, that understanding local users deeply could beat global products with better technology. Second, Ma pioneered the super app model that integrated messaging, payments, e-commerce, and countless other services into single platforms. WeChat became a template that companies worldwide studied and tried to replicate. The concept of building comprehensive ecosystems rather than point solutions influenced product strategy across the technology industry. Though Western companies largely failed to replicate super apps in their markets, the influence on how people think about platform businesses was profound. Third, Ma built one of the most successful investment portfolios in technology history, demonstrating how operating companies could also be sophisticated investors creating value through capital allocation and ecosystem building. Tencent's investment strategy influenced how other large technology companies thought about acquisitions and minority investments. The idea of strategic investing to build ecosystems rather than just making financial bets became more common partly because of Tencent's success. Fourth, Ma's career illustrates both the opportunities and constraints of building businesses in authoritarian systems. His success shows what's possible when entrepreneurship is encouraged and markets grow rapidly. His struggles with regulation show the limits of private enterprise when political priorities shift. This complex relationship between state and private sector in China's economic model will be studied for decades as the world tries to understand how China achieved such rapid development. What won't endure are the specific products and features. QQ will eventually be replaced. WeChat will evolve or be superseded. The games Tencent operates will age. But the business principles, the understanding of user behavior, the approach to building platforms and ecosystems, these will influence entrepreneurs and companies for generations. Ma's legacy is less about specific innovations and more about demonstrating systematic approaches to building enduring businesses. Broader social and economic impact. Tencent's impact on Chinese society extends far beyond its financial success. The company fundamentally changed how Chinese people communicate, transact, entertain themselves, and organize their daily lives. Hundreds of millions of Chinese people spend hours every day inside Tencent's products. This gives Tencent influence over culture, information flow, social interaction, and economic activity that few organizations in human history have possessed. The positive impacts are substantial. Tencent's products connected families separated by distance, enabled small businesses to reach customers digitally, provided entertainment and social connection to hundreds of millions, created tens of thousands of jobs directly and millions indirectly through its ecosystem, and generated wealth for employees, investors, and partners. WeChat Pay helped digitize China's economy, reducing corruption and increasing efficiency by creating digital records of transactions. The negative impacts and concerns are also significant. Tencent's platform power means it can shape what information people see, what products succeed or fail, which businesses thrive or struggle. The company's cooperation with censorship and surveillance raises profound ethical questions about privacy and free expression. The addictive nature of games and social media products, especially their impact on young people, generates legitimate concerns about mental health and social well-being. The question of whether Ma made the world better or just himself richer has no simple answer. He created enormous value for users, employees, investors, and partners. But he also built systems of control and surveillance, profited from addictive products, and cooperated with authoritarian suppression of speech. The complexity resists easy moral judgment. What's clear is that Ma's impact on Chinese society is massive and lasting. Hundreds of millions of people organize their lives around Tencent's products. An entire generation has grown up never knowing a world without QQ or WeChat. The digital infrastructure Ma built will shape Chinese society for decades, regardless of what happens to Tencent as a company. Ma's story raises questions that remain urgent today. First, can the super app model work outside Asia? Western companies have tried and mostly failed to replicate WeChat's comprehensive integration. Cultural differences, regulatory structures, and market maturity all seem to favor specialized apps in Western markets. But the question remains open, especially as companies like X, formerly Twitter, attempt to become everything apps. Second, how should society balance the benefits of platform businesses against their concentration of power? Tencent demonstrates both the consumer benefits of integrated platforms and the risks of any organization having such control over economic and social infrastructure. Regulators worldwide are grappling with this question without clear answers. Third, what does Ma's career teach about operating in authoritarian systems? Can entrepreneurs maintain integrity while cooperating with repressive governments? Where are the boundaries? Ma chose cooperation and accommodation, which allowed Tencent to flourish but required compromises on values like privacy and free expression. Whether this was justified or necessary depends on your perspective and values. Fourth, is copying and improving really inferior to radical innovation? Silicon Valley culture celebrates moonshots and breakthrough ideas, but Ma's success through adaptation and execution challenges this narrative. Maybe most value creation comes from doing known things better, not inventing new things. This question about innovation has implications for how companies allocate resources and how investors evaluate opportunities. Fifth, how transferable are Ma's lessons to other contexts? His success depended heavily on timing, location, market conditions, and personal circumstances. How much of it represents general principles versus specific luck? Can someone follow his playbook today and achieve similar success, or were conditions unique to that historical moment? These questions don't have definitive answers, but Ma's career provides evidence that helps us think about them more clearly. His life demonstrates possibilities and limitations, successes and costs, in ways that pure theory cannot. Final reflection. Pony Ma's story is ultimately about how one person's vision, combined with fortunate timing, hard work, and thousands of good decisions, can reshape society. He didn't start with advantages beyond a good education and technical skills. He wasn't a charismatic visionary who inspired masses. He didn't pursue radical innovation or revolutionary ideas. Instead, he built incrementally, learned continuously, adapted constantly, and compounded advantages over decades. What makes his story compelling isn't just the financial success, though creating hundreds of billions in value is remarkable. It's that his approach, patient, data-driven, user-focused, systematic, represents an alternative model of entrepreneurship that challenges Western assumptions about how great companies are built. It suggests that execution matters more than vision, that understanding users deeply beats having better technology, that adapting proven ideas can create more value than inventing new ones. Ma's career also reveals the costs and compromises of success. He built a company that surveils users, censors speech, and concentrates power in ways that raise serious ethical concerns. His cooperation with authoritarianism enabled his business success but implicates him in that system's harms. There's no way to separate the achievement from the moral complexity. In the end, Pony Ma created one of the most valuable and influential technology companies in history by seeing opportunities others missed, by building products that hundreds of millions of people use daily, and by systematically making good decisions across multiple dimensions over many years. His legacy will be studied, debated, and emulated for decades, not because he was perfect or his approach was universally applicable, but because he demonstrated what's possible when talent, timing, and temperament align in building technology businesses at the intersection of capitalism and state power in the 21st century. His story teaches that success rarely looks like the myth. It's not about brilliant flashes of insight or heroic individual genius. It's about systems, patience, understanding users deeply, making good decisions consistently, learning from failures, building teams and partnerships, and compounding advantages over time. The boring approach, as Ma called it, turned out to be anything but boring in its results, transforming how over 1 billion people live their daily lives and creating one of the great business success stories of our time.